Alright, so when you use ampersand A1, it actually gives the pointer. So now you can even store this value into a variable. For example, let's remove all this code for a time being. You can even do this. So you can even create a variable called unsigned long int. Let's call it as address of A1. Sorry, int. So I can even use this variable in order to store the address of variable A1. So all I need to do is ampersand of A1. So now if I do this, let's see whether compiler is happy with this or not. So now let's try to build the project. Here you can see that there are some warnings of unused variables. So let's do one thing. So let's comment it out, all these variables. So I commented all other variables. Let me just build the project. And there is one important warning. Let's read that. So the warning says that initialization of long unsigned int from char star makes integer from pointer without a cost. So basically what's happening here is that you should remember that this is not a number. The compiler sees it as a pointer. So there is a difference between a number and a pointer in C. So you are trying to assign this entity to a variable, right? So this actually represents a variable. So here the data type of this one is unsigned long int. So we used unsigned long int because unsigned long is 8 bytes. So address size is 8 bytes. So that's why I have chosen unsigned long int. So that's about left hand side. So now let's take a look into the right hand side. So this is actually a pointer data. So pointer data are represented by pointer data type in C. So the type here at the LHS is unsigned long int and the type at the RHS is char star. So we'll understand more about pointer data type when we explore more about pointers. So we have not yet explored that. So just I'm explaining the meaning of the warning. So the warning is because you are trying to take an entity of different data type and you are trying to assign that to a variable of entirely different data type. So that's why there is a data type mismatch. So this is actually not just a number. This is a pointer which belongs to pointer data type. And the pointer data type happens to be char star in this case. So when we cover pointers, so you will understand more about that. So here we are trying to assign a pointer data type into a variable. Hence, there is a data type mismatch warning. So to solve this issue, convert pointer data type into variable data type using typecasting. So about typecasting, we'll understand later. And basically, if you want to solve this issue, convert pointer data type into variable data type using typecasting. So here what you are seeing is typecasting. So this is what we call as typecasting. So we are converting this entity into unsigned long int type. So now this whole thing is now a number. It is just a number. So now there is no pointer. So we converted pointer into a number of unsigned long int. Let's see how compiler responds to that. All right, so let's do the typecasting. So just write the parenthesis and give this data type name. And after that, let's print this value just like an integer. So now let's copy this and let me print here just like an integer. For that, we use %d, right? But remember that %d for integer, but this is long integer. So %ld. Remember that you need not to use d here because this is unsigned data. So addresses are always unsigned. So that's why instead of giving d, which is for signed, you can mention u, long unsigned integer. And now let's run this code. All right, so now you can see that the warning is changed to something else. So now it is saying cast from pointer to integer of different size. So this warning is coming because on my machine, the unsigned long int is actually 4 bytes. Basically, it is compiler dependent, as I said previously. So everything is compiler dependent here. So actually, the size of the data type int is 4 bytes, and size of the long data type is also 4 bytes for this compiler. So that's the reason compiler is saying that here. So this is actually a pointer data of 8 bytes, and you are trying to truncate that by using long int. So what you have to do here is we have to use long int. So long size is actually 8 bytes, isn't it? Now it is fine. And in order to print long data, so you have to use I64 format specifier. Just use I64. So basically, you can also use LLD or LLU. So LLD is for long integer. LLU is for long unsigned integer. For MinGW, you have to use here I64, D or U. So since we are trying to print unsigned data, let's use U, I64U. So now let's try to compile. So now there are no warnings at all. So now let's try to print this. So this happens to be in integer format. So let's convert that into hex format. So you can give X here instead of U. Now let's run. So this is the hex format. So it is printing only 3 bytes because the rest of the bytes are actually 0. So the takeaway from this lecture is you can store the pointer as a number in your variable, but for that you have to use some casting. So here we are using long int because the pointer is of 8 bytes in this machine. That may not be true if you go to the other machine. For example, if we use ARM-based 32-bit microcontrollers, then the address size will be 4 bytes. It all depends on the architecture actually. The point size is actually architecture driven. For 32-bit architecture, the point size will be 4 bytes. For 16-bit architecture, it will be 2 bytes, like that. And here at this part, it may confuse some people. Like if you run the same code on Ubuntu, let's say, or Linux, then it may throw errors here. So in that case, you have to change this to LLX. In the next lecture, let's study about functions in C.